panel of the beginning of this afternoon is the bankability of mega projects, how to increase the appetite of lenders and financial development institutions. I think it's a good question. The panel is sponsored by Suez and co-moderated by Mr. Thierry Noël, CEO of Amman Advisor, and Mr. Bastien Siméon, Global Water Infrastructure Lead of the KPMG. Mr. Noël founded Amman Advisor in 2009 and has held position as Director of Strategy and Development within the multinational leaders in the sector. And Mr. Simeon joined KPMG in 2008 and has worked on numerous water projects in Asia, Europe, and Middle East. He now focuses on infrastructure advisory services for the water sector with a focus on project finance and merger and acquisition. Thierry, Bastien, is your panel.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, a panel on bankability of mega projects. I think here the intent is to have the the views and pick the brains of different types of stakeholders. So we'll have a granting authority, a procuring authority in the name of SWPC, and then Brookfield as a pure financial investor, and two international developers who all have different perspectives. As you might imagine, we also wanted to have one or two lenders, one or two financial institutions on the panel. Unfortunately, we had last-minute cancellations, so that's why you have two empty seats at the at the end of the row. I think first we'll start with a round of introductions from all the panelists, and then we'll start a discussion.
So you want me to introduce myself?
Yes, please.
Khalid Al-Quraishi is the CEO of Saudi Water Partnership, is the principal buyer and procurer in Saudi Arabia.
Teruyuki Miyazaki, Senior Vice President of Brookfield Asset Management, leading the water investment initiative at Brookfield, based in New York.
Rafael Pérez Feito, International Operations Director of Aqualia.
Good afternoon, Didier Sachot, BOT PPP Vice President for Suez, covering water and waste activities.
Okay, thank you. I think as a sort of a first theme, a first topic, I mean, we've heard on one of the previous panels in the morning about PPP models and risk allocation, and how these have to be balanced between the two parties, the public and the private. And I think Thierry and I wanted to pick up on this here in this session, more from a financeability and bankability point of view, and hear the thoughts of the panelists as to what some of your main concerns might be, but also given the trends of the market, some of the opportunities you might see. Maybe if you want to start as a granting authority, and then we'll hear the thoughts of the I would say the other side of the equation.
I really would like to see the things behind this question, because I see that this model IPP, IWP, ISTV was very mature now, and I think the number of bidders who's really interested, or developers who are interested, the number is really more than normal. Since 2018, I mean, take an example, Independent Water Project. If I take Rabo, we receive 5 bids. They submit the bids. Then Shugeg, we receive 6 bids. And in Yambu now, just 1 month ago, we received also 6 bids, which is telling that there is a balance on the risk and rewards from actual numbers we are receiving. And if you look at it from also tariff point of view, we see also very good trending and decaying down to lowering the water tariff. So I see from that there is really very good balance between them and real numbers. Looking to risk allocation to the developer and lenders and to the clients or the country, Still, I personally believe that at least in the GCC, there is very good agreements that 25 years, with most of them suffering guaranteed. And that really give very low risk to exposure to the lender and developer versus the country. Also, there is a risk on construction and operation, which is in the SPV, but still, in the area where we have a shortage of supply. Still also, in reality, this is not real risk on the lender, because end of the day, the water has to be off-take. So that's really a few thoughts in the beginning of this discussion.
Right. So from my perspective, the theme of this panel is the mega water project. So talking about the size. So I have been working for this industry more than 25 years and 15 years for water. So in today's market, it's quite apparent that the scale of each project become bigger and bigger. So, and also the water is always a core infra asset class. So relatively stable and very long-term fixed cash flow is expected. So we are the private investors, but today we see the many pension funds or the sovereign wealth fund is breaking into this market. So competition is become very tough. So as one of the largest scale private investors, we Brookfield trying to differentiate ourselves from other competitors by the scale of the investment. So this mega trend, the big scale project itself is a positive trend for us. And the return level and the cash yield is always challenging. Comparing to other asset class of the infra, the water is sometimes a little too good, too stable. So we are always struggling to figure out decent returns by the investment into the water sectors. But still, as I said, due to this core infra natures, we always looking at the water as one of the very attractive asset classes.
Yeah, I agree that after many years, I think that we are, for the last at least 5 or 7 years, we've seen a situation regarding financing has been never that good. I think there's a number of very bright and green lights regarding financing. I think we have a degrees of liquidity hardly seen in the past. Lenders of any nature are perceiving the investment in water as a very low risk investment, even close to sovereign risk. And the good thing is that at the same time, many countries are issuing more and more sovereign debt through bonds at very competitive prices, taking down the cost of the debt alongside. But at the same time, that is not meaning in many countries that PPPs are not welcome. They are seen as a compatible model. So basically, the countries are not increasing their indebtedness as a way of tendering everything and all the infrastructure through EPC or direct procurement, but procuring these projects in a compatible way with PPPs. The cost of this debt, the average ratings. I was taking a few notes before the panel, and I've seen that, for example, Saudi Arabia has issued 10-year T-bond some weeks ago at a cost of 3.13% in local currency, in riyals. So that's another good news. We are seeing debt available both in dollars and local currency, decreasing even more the risk that is perceived by investors. So there's a lot of good and good news and good perspectives along the road regarding financing. I think it's been key as well that the public administrations have progressively understood that designing good projects and good tender documents, financing agreements, good risk matrices is always good for the outcome of the project. We've seen that indexations on forest risk, on inflation, and interest rates are more and more common, and that is not something to take for granted because it didn't happen that much in the past. So I'm very optimistic. I'm very possibly regarding the environment that we are seeing now regarding financing. But if I would have to point out maybe a couple of things to keep in mind regarding the investment and the financing, one of them would be, for example, the refinancing risks. What we are seeing in the last 5 or 7 years is not actually pure project finance as we knew it. It's basically soft mini perms. So all the developers are forced to assume a risk of refinancing, even if it's limited, 7 years down the road. That has to be kept in mind, right? Because interest rates could change and they can be hedged up to a certain extent. So that's something that I think everybody should tender responsibly, right? And I think we have to keep that in mind. And if we want to see project finance coming back to the game again, long-term non-recourse debt, which is available in certain projects and countries, I think we all have to assume that it's slightly more expensive because it's basically provided by funds, not banks. And considering the environment of very aggressive tendering and considering the high pressure on cost, I'm not seeing a lot of companies going for pure non-recourse long-term debt because of the price pressure. So that's something that I think we would have to keep in mind as well in the future if we want to keep having this long-term debt and in a healthy way.
Thank you.
Okay, what I fully agree with what you are saying. What I could add is that I see the financing market more and more competitive, talking about the IRR and soft mini-perms, as you mentioned. And also more and more developers are seeking to take O&M shares. And overall, the competition is tough on the EPC side and obviously at the SPC and O&M level. Lenders, there is I would say, liquidity on the market, tough competitions, international banks, ECA depends. In the past, they were, I think, quite active, but now with the soft mini-perms, it can be also a challenge for them to fit in this model. Yes, so the market is here, and it's a new wave, I would say, compared to 15 years old, where developers were not so many, I would say, and the financing was a little bit limited. We are always talking about long tenure. Now the time has been a little bit changed, I would say.
I mean, on picking up on the issue of liquidity you were talking about, despite the fact that those models are proven, lenders, they don't like risks. And I mean, again, given the sort of fierce competition between developers, and I'm not just talking here in the region, but globally, because at the end of the day, a lot of groups, like Aqualia or Suez are global. Brookfield is also a global investor. So you end up competing in various regions of the world. I mean, do you feel that lenders are getting somewhat nervous because they see that, prices are driven down, margins are driven down, and that they might be afraid that, some projects might eventually run into trouble and they become a little bit more cautious when lending to sort of these projects? Is that something that you've seen in some instances, or we're not there yet? I don't know if you...
Yeah, I mean, compared to 10 years ago, we could see that European and Japanese banks, they were very, very active. Now we see more and more local and regional banks. So this has changed a little bit. I would say the local sourcing, it's not only a concern of EPC, it's also something very important for the local authorities on the financing. IPO is also a driver for them. So overall, this has changed. And for sure, if we talk about typical international lenders, they may be more prudent. I'm thinking about the French banks. In the past, they were very, very active. You know that in Middle East. Now, they are a little bit hesitating, I would say.
I agree that probably not that they are nervous, but they are refraining themselves from being too exposed. I think that thin margins, along with the size of each operation, is making them either not participating because they're seeing progressively thinner margins and more stringent agreements. I mean, each agreement is more exigent than the previous one. So either they refrain from participating or they take smaller stakes. But that, I guess, it's linked to another fact, which is pipelines. I think that as long as there are pipelines concentrated in just a few countries and a few sectors, probably what we will see is a rotation or a mix of lenders that if it keeps going in that way, maybe we will see some restrictions or some problems with financing. But I don't think we're there yet. But,
In our case, the financing we procure is a kind of leverage of our equity investment at the project co level or holding co level. And as far as I know, in terms of those leverage, still the most of our investment in the global market for the infrastructures successfully procure the financing from the lenders. As he said, that the member of the aggressive lending institutions, the banks, has been changing, but the availability itself is still there. So we don't have any crucial problem so far.
Do you have any comments?
I really have some comment on the lenders before they lend. They are assigning a lender technical advisor who assure that what is being proposed by the consortiums that for running 25 years is really bankable and can have enough cash flow to continue the project. I think there is a check before they are lending, and there's no change. I think what has been changed and why there is thinning of the margin. It's thinning because the technology being mature, the way how people was addressing the risk in the past was being changed. So that's what is it. So it's natural that the price should go down, and it's not because they're not getting enough revenue and the cash flow established earlier. They put many risks, which was because they are uncertain about certain things. But now they know. For instance, 10 years ago, they never have boo in Saudi Arabia, so they don't know whether the cash will come, the country will pay or not. Now there is a 10 years cash flow record, so that's a lot of risk being taken out. And similar the technology, people who will decide to build an RO 10 years ago, they will put certain margin of risk. So the margin of revenue will be higher because they're assuming certain risk, which is not actual risk. It's maturity more than really they're thinning. And that's why the number today, if you look at 3 years from now, with a lot of a project coming in the pipelines, still the bidder interest and appetite is high. And as I say, within 3 years now, 5 to 6 bidders. Bidders, they're submitting, they're putting bid guarantees. So they're very serious. And we are getting more new. So which is telling that there is no thinning, actually. It's just really worry. Now it's been discovered. It's not a real concern.
Okay, maybe it's a good moment to transition, looking forward in the future. And I guess the title here was how to increase the appetite of lenders and financial development institutions. I guess we just talked about the pure, risk allocation, margins, financial. What we wanted to open up on, what are things that we see that could come into play. We all know about SDGs. We all know about some of the climate change policies. I think in the water industry, we have the privilege to be one of the industries who has 2 SDGs out of the 17, which are dedicated to our industry. We're seeing, we do a lot of work with investors, a huge amounts of investors lenders, funds, social funds, so a whole range of investors interested by the water industry because of its potential impact. I always quote the CEO of BlackRock, the largest private equity fund in the world, who in his letter to shareholders says, "My job used to be to give you a financial return. My job from now on is to give you a financial return and a return on the planet and society." So we're seeing a tremendous shift from lenders, investors, and they're seeing the water industry as a hugely impactful industry to invest in. So our thesis is that actually sustainability is going to become an attraction factor and will increase appetite to the industry. That's our hypothesis. I'd just like to take one example where I think some of the international financial institutions could also pave the way as a role. Just one example, if you all know the BRD, they've developed in 2015 what they call a green energy transition approach, which they use to decide on the bankability, feasibility, eligibility of projects. And they have actually designed documentation. And what I found interesting is I'll just read the areas which they're looking at with the sustainability lens. There are 8 of them: energy efficiency projects, building development, transport projects, flaring projects, environmental projects technologies, hydropower, and desalination projects. So clearly the desalination sector is a sector identified as an area where sustainability matters, et cetera, et cetera. Just one last comment on that approach. What do these investors, lenders, IFIs mean by, it's interesting to understand what they mean by sustainability. It's a big word. Some of the examples, they are looking at, water, rational use of water beyond the plant. Are non-revenue levels too high? Are per capita consumption, is it reducing or not? So before considering an investment, for instance, in a desal plant or lending, they will look at whether the environment of the plant makes sense or not from a sustainability perspective, which I believe is kind of a new view of life. They will look at the impact of brine disposal on, environmental, we all hear about the coral barriers, et cetera, et cetera. They will actually use an eligibility factor, the carbon footprint per cubic meter of desalinated water. And then, of course, consideration for things like renewable energy sources, et cetera. So that's just an example, but our hypothesis is that these IFIs, these sustainability factors can have 2 impacts. First, it could bring more capital and potentially more patient capital, which may have a cost or risk profile which is a bit lower than the traditional one. And secondly, it would probably increase the overall sustainability of projects beyond the financial elements. That's the hypothesis. So I guess my question to the panel is this a good hypothesis, or is it just PR by the players?
I think it's very good, and I think now the industry really doing what we mentioned exactly on desalinations. I mean, if you look at recent mandate of energy cap of consumption per cubic meter, which is turned to CO2 emissions, and technology change from the thermal to RO, really apart from what you say right now. I mean, in early 10, 15 years from now, the consumption of 1 cubic meter more than 15 kilowatt hour, which is take it on CO2 emissions, which is now it's like a 10 kilogram CO2 per 1 kilowatt hour, roughly, maybe less now. Yesterday in our keynote, we mentioned that our program, which is until 2025, we plan to build 4.3 million cubic meter per day. And if you see, when we choose technology with a cap of less 3.5, we're almost saving more than 40,000 tons of CO2 not to emit it to the atmosphere, which is really counting on this. And that's going on. And that's now become a mandate for the developer in order to win. It's become spontaneous. If they want to be a lower tariff, because the energy consuming 40% of the total or cost, they have to find an innovative way to. That's one area. The other area, which is on sustainability, the local content mandate. We mandate minimum 40, 50 in constructions. That's mean for me the sustainability, because we have to do a local supplier, a local spare part, a local manpower from the market. That will make it more sustainable, because the resources will be from the country, so it's more resources. Plus, indirect way we mandate local investor and local developer from the country. That will make the knowledge to be transferred. Recently in Yamba, and I think Tawila before us did, on GCC, we mandate also, or we didn't, we allow to use renewable energy, not more than 20%, just to ensure continuity of supply, which is really allow the reduction of using a normal energy and reducing the CO2 emissions. And then the sewage systems, we did not allow any sludge to be out. All the sludge has to be beneficiary sludge. So indirect way, you also reduce the footprint of the CO2 emissions, so you make it zero in the futures. So all of these really, I think the industries, the water industry, as overall going to the things which you mentioned now in the mandate.
Oh, yes. For us, Brookfield, the sustainability issue is a real. It's not just a PR matter. And for instance, this is not the water, but for the power generation side, we have been investing into the IPPs or power project more than, I think, 5 gigawatts something. But 100% of our asset is all renewable, just a hydro, wind, and solar. And we never made any investment into the thermal-based generation since the beginning. So as a private infra fund, we have a diverse source of the investors, and those compliance to the sustainable issues of mandate is a really crucial requirement these days. So for us, this is a real tangible issues.
And do you believe that's going to translate into kind of a lower risk, better returns, or is it just because you feel that it's a better long-term view? Will it actually translate on the previous factors we were discussing about, the usual ratios of bankability?
Correct.
Are you observing a connection, or you're betting on a connection?
Yeah, I think we are in a transition period, but in the near future, I assume that, for example, some project try to issue a bond. Those compliance rate on the sustainability or ESG, SDGs might be reflected on the credit rating. So I think we cannot ignore those economic impact as well. This might be.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I always like to say that even before the SDGs existed, we were already contributing to them as a sector. I mean, we are lucky enough to, as you said, have SDG 6 and 17, and then many cross connections. So not being a financial investor or a private equity, we don't really have to struggle or shift our business model to really contribute to SDGs or to the good of the planet or of the people. We are doing that by our natural activity. So that's much easier for us. But you mentioned sustainability as maybe a theoretical concept. So I don't see that in our sector as a theoretical. I see it in a very close way and direct way. I see it, for example, at the shareholders level. We're no exception. Our two shareholders are Mr. Carlos Slim and IFM Investors, and sustainability and reputational damage and ethics and compliance and governance are absolutely key for them. So it's not something theoretical. They're asking for that, not every day, but almost. We see that at project level. I see sustainability as a way, and being private sector and water, you know very well what I mean. Projects which have not been sustainable and they basically have been cancelled. So we will get more high returns. I'm not sure, but at least we will be able to keep them and to increase the pipeline, because there's no way to keep or to have 20, 30-year long projects without thinking about sustainability. sustainability at environmental level, social level, economic level, ethic level. I mean, there's no way to think about 30 years ahead of you without really putting all those issues on the first line, right? And then I think society is demanding a different way of doing business. And again, trying to approach them from a very pragmatic point of view, what does that mean for us? Again, I think it means pipeline. I mean, if society accepts that business model in the water sector, that will mean public sector involving the private sector in the water provision services at a higher level. But that being said, we're not able, or we're not, as I said, a financial investor, and therefore we cannot do things just by ourselves. We have a client. We have a public client, public administration that makes a tender and design the parameters that it's going to value and to base their decision on, and therefore I think that it's a strong message for them as well. We as private sector can do a lot of things on ourselves, but we have to see more and more demand from the public sector requesting and really not asking, but including that as a must in the different procedures and tenders that we see.
And from the lenders, I guess, because the lenders would have a role to play there as well. No, I was saying, and you were talking about from the operator, developers, and governments, but I think also for the lenders, since the lenders, in terms of eligibility or some of the conditions or going longer term, could actually influence these factors quite well. Maybe just before I move to Didier, so tell me if I understood you well, Raphael. You see it clearly as, first of all, we've done it forever. It's in the DNA of the water industry. The argument I'm hearing is, you're right, it's been in our DNA. We should just let the world know that we've been doing this for 100 years, and there's probably a lack of kind of communication or, understanding how impactful. We did a project with a water company looking at SDG. Actually, water has a direct impact on 15 of the 17 SDGs. And I don't know, I think if Carlos, the future president, is here or not, I think this relationship between SDG and the desalination water industry is something, as an industry, we should really leverage. But coming back to your point, so I'm understanding it's going to lower the risk because it's going to be more sustainable long term. It's going to incentivize to have more projects, but you are uncertain whether it'll have a financial return against it. So my next question to Didier was, is sustainability an investment, which means it requires a return, or is it a must-have that has no value?
For me, today, it's a must-have. I would say on the side, we have no choice. We have to move to this direction. And compared to a few years ago, we see more and more the social importance, impact. I'm always taking the example of the ESIA, Environmental Social Impact Assessment, that we have to fix to reach the financial close, CP's clearance. We like very much when clients are sure from the beginning, pre-qualification stage, that communities, inhabitants, populations will agree on the project. And this is really important. Second aspect, the environmental friendly project, where at the end of the day, there will be, it will mitigate the climate change, if I can say, and the carbon footprint, etc. So this is really important. And I mean, we have no choice. It's not an excuse to have an additional return. Today, this is a market and the trend.
Maybe just picking up on Raphael's point about the fact that it's coming from the public side, from the grantors. If you'd be interested in hearing thoughts from all the panelists as to how that might translate into sort of procurement frameworks and evaluation criteria. Where do you see things might change or evolve to have more of these aspects included in the evaluation of proposals for future projects?
I'm not sure whether now today that there is a gate, that without that gate, the project will not fly. I mean, the bids will not fly. For instance, the energy cap. That's one of the things that it was not there before. It was go and you submit based on the international international price. Now it's opposite. What we do in 2 or 3 years, we say if you are above 3.5, you're disqualified. Go and find another technology. That's one area. Second area, which is from evaluation point, local content. You have to comply that you will be able to do 40 to 50% during constructions. And local content have a lot of things, manpower, spare parts, manufacture, whatever. And that's also another criteria of evaluation. And if anybody commit, if he did not comply, he will have an penalties on this. So that's an evaluation where you improve the social responsibility, sustainability factor that you mentioned. It's really coming to the economic side. I mean, if somebody comply and he bring, and that's what we see. People did not go a little bit below 3.5, I'd say 3.4. No, most of them, they are really below 3.2. And most of the time, the one who will be lower, the one who will be creative in his financial model technology to be lower than 3.2. I mean, lowering compared to the other competitors. So it's embedded in evaluation today. Now, we need to think more what we can embed and procurement just towards sustainability, which is really also the technology, the investor, the developer really willing to do it. I mean, they have really enough belief that they can do. For instance, now, when Adwiya bought maximum 25 BV in their project in Tawila, and we put 20, we take in account that the continuity of supply and the capacity chart. And we take out that, and we know today the BV or renewable energy will be available during the daytimes. We did not say, okay, open. A lot of people say, why you cap it to 20? Because we are worried about the continuity of supply. We don't want just to look at it from, because maybe some of the bids, he will say, okay, I will be 50%. Then, in the night, he will not have a 50%. So we just count it from different angles. So that's, and I believe that going gradually would put in little bit things to the market, see how the market responds, and then you can correct if it is not reasonable to. And I think that the market now really, I see the response, and not only in Saudi Arabia, even in the GCC, that's what we did in the first time was really in the right times.
Okay, so in our case, on the majority of the investment, we take the control of the business. So it means that we as a sponsor or owner of the business, we should be fully responsible for all the impact by those project of business. So naturally, we should be quite stringent or responsible for compliance of those impact. And internally, we have a ESG protocol, and from the due diligence phase or investment committee approval or asset management phase, on each phases we have to check the fulfillment of those ESG requirements. So this is a kind of a long-term commitment, especially from the common equity control investors viewpoint. That's our position.
Yeah, well, maybe I would add, I can imagine or think of a number of things that could be requested or implemented, but that are becoming more and more standard, but still not maybe there, which is, for example, having compliance protocols or independent bodies taking care of, internally auditing companies, certifications, ethics system. I think those should be gradually almost as basic as having a quality system in your company, right? And I think those things should become more and more common on the public administration request in the tender.
So if we go back to the criteria during the procurement phase, which ones could be implemented by the customers? I would say, lenders, they do their KYC, know your customer process. looking at the quality of the sponsors, EPC and operators. Maybe customers should also do this kind of exercise more deeply to be sure that the process will be delivered on time. Most of the time, we do during the process pre-qualification phase, they select, let's say, developers, EPC with a good track record, but maybe they should ask as well what were the past references with bad records. Otherwise, they may miss something, and the project won't be a success for everybody.
Looking at the time, should we open for, I don't know if there are any questions from the floor.
I think it is important, as I said before more than once, if you add the social element and the third P to private, public people, you will increase finance. How? Because you can collect bonds or NGO bonds. We call it sukuk waqfiyya, waqf sukuk, which will be issued in Saudi Arabia hopefully this year or next year. Malaysia is issuing billions of sukuk every year. So when you are adding not just the people, also the environment, I mean, we have to protect the investment. I mean, major mega water projects should look at sustainability of environment and people, social. Now, if you do that, people are willing to give you bonds and return 5 years, 15 years, 10 years, and some people will just give it away to the NGO. They don't need to return all of it. All these options are available. And I will just take 1 minute to answer your question about, I wrote it, but I forgot it. Sustainability, investment in the present, or, and yes, I think it is a good investment because it is a good investment for your life in this world and your eternal life. And the return will come in your eternal life, not in this life. Even if it doesn't come in, except that I'm enjoying good weather and good green condition, but in the eternal life, you will get more return.
Thank you. So we won't do an NPV on that one, but I can totally understand your points on this excellent return. Thank you, Adil. The mic is over there. If you can ask your question and pass it on.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the esteemed gentlemen. It has been very fruitful discussions. My name is Ahmed. I'm from the holding company for water and water from Egypt. I just have a comment, and maybe it turns out to be a question later. It's just about the governmental commitment. I think it's very important for the lenders to have this governmental commitment and see it very obvious. And it relies, again, firstly with the SDGs stuff that you have mentioned, that because, of course, if there's a need, then they sense that there is a need from the government to apply and to narrow the gap between the demand and the supply. And within the region, of course, and the scarcity of water we're having now, then it's very obvious. And then we have been personally seeing that we have been approached by lots of lenders coming to help us in this issue. And another stuff is the commitment of the government to continue. I think the success story in Saudi Arabia and the GCC realized that there have been previous experiences, and experiences that are there, and then the lenders now are very much confident in the system, and it's easy to go on it. Vice versa, and our situation is still, we are still stumbling in having a first desalination project financed by an A scheme, BOT or Triple P, so then cases are different. So I think maybe if I pose this question to the gentleman, that how much is the governmental commitment can be reflected on the process itself. Thank you.
My name is Geir Bergman from Climate Investor 2. We are a private equity fund investing in water, wastewater, and desalination in emerging economies. My question is, just take out the mega from the title, make this a little bit simpler. what is the appetite of lenders and financial institutions to enter into the emerging markets, sub-Saharan Africa, or some of the more difficult countries beyond the GCC?
Maybe for the people who operate in some of these countries, what are your views? I guess there are ways to structure projects, or who wants to have a stab at this?
Starting, well, the first comment on the gentleman in the first row, I think he was absolutely right, because I think he was pointing out impact investment, and I think that's another big thing now coming, which is basically a scope-oriented investment, right? So I think that was a good point. Regarding the sub-Saharan Africa, I think for many companies and for many operators, that still remains a flagship area. I think we are not closed. I mean, we're not saying we would never do that, but I think that requires a higher level of low-risk environment, right? There's a number of projects launched by IFIs in sub-Saharan countries, but they're not actually market-driven. I think they are flagship projects where they are basically attracting private companies. They are involving private companies, basically with the call of saying, I mean, there's basically a demonstrative project. I mean, you will make a profit, and there's almost no risk. So for many companies, I think that's still the way to go in these areas. I think it will happen for sure. It will happen, but in the next 3-5 years, I do not see basically open market competition in many of these countries if it's not under this scheme.
Yeah, I mean, typically there has to be guarantees by the likes of MIGA to be able to go into these projects in countries, or similar instruments for you know, have enough security on your returns and your investment.
Exactly.
I think maybe also to add to your question here, we're talking about bankability of projects. What we're seeing in emerging countries is also the growth of totally different business models and infrastructure model to supplying water, which may actually have some strength in emerging countries against kind of a centralized infrastructure approach to water supply. So I think it's not just a matter of country and the risk and the project analysis, it's also about how do you supply water to emerging nations beyond a centralized infrastructure, which is unaffordable. And if you look at some of the water kiosk model, some of the social investments that are being made in places like Rwanda and other places, actually that's a very, very interesting model that is unique to some of these emerging countries. But it challenges the way we've been thinking about water supply since the Romans, basically.
Any other questions?
Okay. We have a couple minutes. I guess we maybe just to wrap up, and we've not prepared or rehearsed anything. I'd just like to say, if we think of the future of mega projects, our estimate it's going to affect in the next 10 years. We're probably going to globally double the installed capacity of mega projects today. It'll go 30 countries should be involved, so it's really a global issue. And Saudi Arabia will be the leader for the next 10 years. So I guess one request to maybe close the session is to say, since you're leading it, please think of our eternal life and bring us to a great eternal life by providing a sustainable desalination industry in the future. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you
Well, I want to thank all our panelists for their participation, and the audience for the presence and the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.